Greetings, and welcome to this brief introduction to Plato's Republic, Book 6. I'm Keith Whitaker. The topic of Plato's Republic, Book 6 is the philosopher. It continues the discussion of the philosopher begun at the end of Book 5. To understand the character of that discussion requires looking back for a moment. By the end of Republic Book 4, Socrates' account of the justice of the most just city seems to have been completed. But his city of speech, led by Polemarchus and Thrasymachus, forces Socrates to return to and explain the community of women and children. The account of this innovation completes the justice of the most just city. The guardians sacrifice everything, their wives, their children, hence even their family names, to the city. At this moment, the question arises with full force. If this is justice, how is such a city possible? Socrates' amazing answer is, only if philosophers rule or rulers philosophize. So, only after Socrates has confirmed the interest of two potentially worthy students, Polemarchus and Thrasymachus, does he introduce the philosopher into the dialogue, or rather the philosopher king, a twofold role. This twofold role defines the character of Book 6. On the surface, for Adeimantus and Glaucon, Socrates presents philosophy in a light attractive to the city as potential kings. At the same time, for potential students, Polemarchus and Thrasymachus, Socrates shares more questionable features of philosophy. Let's see how he does so. Book 6 opens with a political question. Why should they, the philosophers, rule? Socrates answers, because of their natures, which include a propensity for all moral virtue too. How politically appealing, complete virtue. But if we look more closely, we see that Socrates says that the philosopher by nature longs for truth, and that he does no harm because all his energy is spent in his longing. This means that the philosopher does not seek to do good, or if he does do good for others, it is only as incidental to pursuing truth for himself. Quite reasonably, Adeimantus objects that nowhere do philosophers actually rule. They are everywhere called useless or altogether bad. Socrates responds that that's the city's fault. The cities fail to make use of philosophers, and they corrupt the best natures. The city is the problem. And yet Socrates also reveals that the philosophers contribute to their bad reputation. They are stargazers. They care about things that most people find useless or even dangerous. Also, while it is true that each city produces the so-called virtue suited to itself, which is usually bad, and so corrupts would-be philosophers, this point shows that morality is a condition of philosophy, not part of philosophy. If the philosopher is best qualified to rule, it's through caring about so-called useless things and, by grace of God, emerging unmutilated by the city's so-called virtue. Further, Socrates says here, staying within the political context, that to lay hold of philosophy without being destroyed, the city must treat philosophy in exactly the opposite fashion than it's treated now. Philosophy must be the end of all pursuits, not a mere hobby. So here, at the center of Book 6, Socrates admits that he is being spirited, at least in speech. His spiritedness causes him to project a public-spirited image of philosophy. At the same time, he admits that philosophy is, in essence, dynamite for the city, since the true philosopher considers nothing great, even or especially human life. Socrates and Adeimantus then turn to yet another political question. What learning and practices will establish the philosopher's rule? Socrates says that they must start again at the beginning. The great test of rulers is that they love their city and hold on to that love throughout all trials. But this is not philosophy. Philosophy loves truth, not opinion. The philosopher's greatest learning concerns the idea of the good. Socrates emphasizes that we do not sufficiently know this idea. He can say what it's not, but what is it? Glaucon steps in and demands an answer. Socrates replies with more images. Leave aside what the good is, it's too much to aim for. Aim instead at what appears to be the child of the good, the sun. So just as the sun as a visible god is supposedly the cause of all light, which makes visible the visible things, and is somehow the cause of the being of the visible things, so too the good is somehow the cause of the intelligibility of the intelligible things, and even of their being. In fact, it is beyond being. Glaucon here swears by the invisible god Apollo. Socrates says to his original listener that Glaucon did so quite ridiculously. At this point, Socrates adds yet another image, the image of the divided line. The great appeal of the divided line is that it seems to offer both an ontology, an account of four classes of beings, images, visible things, mathematical objects, and intelligible things, and a psychology, an account of four activities of the soul, imagination, trust, understanding, and intellect, as well as to suggest that these capacities of the soul exactly fit the classes of what is. The soul, at least the soul of the philosopher, is somehow everything. This is the most beautiful part of this most beautiful book. In its way, it is a most beautiful example of justice. Using these images of the sun and the divided line, Socrates paints a picture of philosophy that the city cannot blame and must even honor. But to his more careful listeners, he points to the questions behind these images. What is sight? What is intellect? What is soul? What is nature? What is God? Thanks for tuning into this brief introduction to Plato's Republic, Book 6. I'm Keith Whitaker, and for introductions to other Platonic dialogues, check out my channel, Plato's World.